Hello again, and welcome to part 2 of my video series on dogfights of today and beyond. In part 2 we will be talking about combat and all that it entails, from your initial briefing to making it back to base. There are a lot of topics to discuss, so it would be easier for me to start from the beginning, and in order we'll go from the briefing stage, including recon assessment, going through possible targets and threats on the way, the flight route and ship loadout, known and unknown targets, flight elements such as your own or other friendly flights, taking off and heading to your target, engaging your target and use of weapons, defensive tactics, and finally going home and landing. Moving on, our first stage is the planning stage. Depending on the game, this can be dynamic and changing on the fly, or set missions with fixed parameters. It all depends on how you want to play. In DCS or Diaspora, it's generally given to you in text before slotting up, hopefully telling you all you need with recon pictures and such. In BMS, you have an overview of the combat area. Here, in the Korean campaign, we can see the north and south split by the DMZ, with friendly units in blue and enemies in red. In the top left, we get to pick from a list of missions, such as Cap, supporting other units against enemy air threats, Bar Cap, similar to the above but patrolling routes between friendly forces and known enemy locations, Seed, basically hunting surface-to-air missile sites, Deep Strike, a specific target deep into enemy territory, such as a power station. These are but just a few of the different missions available for your choosing. After you've selected the type of mission you want, you'll be given an overview of the routes you will fly, starting from your takeoff location, routes on the way, to the target and egress points to go home. Depending on how much recon information you have, you may see threats along your path, such as SAM sites, man pads, or AAA. And in space, these could be automated defences. Next, you need to weigh up how to proceed, but in some cases you are not alone in your task. Yes, you and your flight may be equipped to bomb stationary targets, like a building, and have some anti-air capabilities, but lack the option to use anti-radiation missiles to take out SAM radars, for example. But there will often be other flights flying with you, so the first flight will be a few minutes in front of you to clear the way of threats, ground and air, and then you'd move in to strike the targets. Then Cap would provide cover in case enemy fighters try to interdict you. You are able to change the plan slightly, but you have to be aware that if you move routes too far, other flights may not necessarily do the same, especially if they're AI controlled. Once you've gone through all of this, and you've picked your targets, making sure that people don't all engage the same thing, you can move on to your loadouts. Again, by default you'll be given a loadout appropriate to their tasking, but you can change this to suit your specific needs, such as carrying drop tanks to allow you some more wiggle room in terms of afterburning or extending your range. Maybe dumb bombs are not for the job and you need cluster munitions, or guided bombs for accuracy. And in Space Sims you can imagine there will be a variety of similar weapons to choose from. However, you can't go into the air without the ability to defend yourself against other aircraft, so short-range missiles are guaranteed, with medium-range missiles being optional depending on how many hardpoints you have spare. Now that you've got a plan and a loadout, you need to take note of anything specific in case you forget. Missions can be time-sensitive depending on your role. If you take off too early, you won't have the support of seed aircraft, and if you're too late, you won't be able to help out against enemy air. So take note of the time for takeoff and the time to target. Note down the flight names of others operating with you, and know which waypoint your target is at. Next, we take off, usually in pairs with a lead aircraft and a wingman, to make sure you never fly alone. Now it's time to get serious. Depending on the game or mission, you'll have different assets at your disposal. During flight, if you have AWACS for early warning systems, you can check in with them to make sure the skies are clear at intervals throughout the mission. You may want to have your fire control radar scanning ahead of you by, say, 80 miles to spot targets beyond visual range, or BVR. BVR, or beyond visual range, is the first stage for engagements and can determine the future of a battle. I hope Star Citizen has at least some BVR combat, and not have everything up close and personal. In this instance, it will work through our fire control radar. This beams a sort of cone outwards, searching for returns, and when aircraft start getting, say, 80 miles from you, they'll start to appear on it. But the distances are so great they might fade and come back quite a lot. Using this, we can tell the distance of a target, its altitude and direction it's flying. But you don't necessarily want to engage the first thing you see, as this will be sure to make you run out of ammo really quickly. You want to make sure that you stick as close to your plan as possible without going off the tracks for a fight. If they're definitely in the way and a threat, we move on to engaging beyond visual range. Using your Fire Control Radar, or FCR, you will search for targets that pose a threat. Assuming the previous statement of engaging them is true, you can ask AWACS to identify the target for you as either friendly or hostile.
Shipment 1-1, Sentry 1, contact confirmed hostile. ID was MiG-23.
When the target is confirmed as hostile, you will keep tabs on it via the FCR and get into engagement range of your missiles. Using the AIM-120 Advanced Medium Range Air-to-Air Missile, or SLAMmer, we can fire off missiles way before we even see the enemy, depending on the type as far away as 50 miles to 100 miles. These are guided using radar on the aircraft, up until it's able to lock on itself and track via its own radar. You generally have no warning these are launched. The only warning you'll have is when the missile radar locks onto you itself. When they do lock, they'll give off their own radar signal, and through your radar warning receiver you'll be warned of this, but at most you'll have about 10 seconds to react if you're lucky. Pilots with keen eyes will be able to see the missile incoming by smoke trails, waiting until the last moment before wasting countermeasures and or manoeuvring defensively. Naturally, there are going to be different tactics for this in space. Missile characteristics will be completely different, no longer bound by gravity or atmospheric resistance. In regards to physical countermeasures for radar seekers, you want to use chaff in an attempt to blind the target with metal shards to appear as another group of aircraft, or flooding with multiple returns. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are different tactics such as making the missile crash into terrain, since it's trying to fly an intercept course. You can also use terrain to hide from it, or keep it to your 3 or 9 o'clock. This is called beaming, so the missile has to constantly intercept ahead of you. At a certain point, it's no longer flying with any impulse, it's now ballistic. Using this point to make the missile dive and pull up sharply will make it bleed a lot of speed, and hopefully in an effort to make it simply fall out the sky. At beyond visual ranges, you can do a maneuver called pumping, such as a split S, in an effort to increase distance from the target and the missile. Shortly after BVR engagements, you can expect a few things to happen. Either you or the enemy will turn tail and run if outmatched or outnumbered, or you'll merge with the enemy. Merge meaning that friendlies and enemies have arrived at the same visual arena. This is where things get a lot more fun. From here you can expect to be engaged by short-range missiles, such as the AIM-9, which uses infrared homing. Again, there are different types, but engagement ranges can be anywhere from under a mile to about 20 plus miles. Countermeasures against these are flares, which try to spoof the missile seeker into locking onto that heat signature instead of your own, but some have semi-active radar as well. The up or downside depends on your frame of reference, is that you'll often not get a warning. Since they won't have radar giving off emissions and can be entirely passive, the only warning you'll get is the explosion. This is why if being chased in dogfights, you need to keep your eyes on the aircraft following you, looking out for a launch. The window for these isn't huge either. Some missiles are rear aspect, meaning they need to be fired from behind, as they'll lock onto the engines of the aircraft better, while others are all aspect, being from any angle. This is where most of my fun comes from. It's where pilots' real skills come into play instead of who has better radar or weapons, within reason of course. Everyone is trying to get behind an opponent, or trying to shake off an enemy. Things can turn into a furball real fast where you lose sight on who's friendly or who's enemy. You don't want to launch without visual confirmation, and hubris is a dangerous thing to have in a dogfight. So, let's talk a bit more about launching missiles. We'll start with short-range missiles. First, we can lock onto a target by pointing the cross on the HUD over the aircraft. It will not disseminate between friend or foe, it will just simply lock onto what's over the cross. However, if I'm not sure it's an enemy, I can simply call ray gun, and if nobody responds with buddy spike, then you're not locking onto a friendly, and that you are clear to fire. Some missiles can have a great rate of turn, at around 60 degrees a second, meaning that in 3 seconds a missile can turn tail and head in the opposite direction. So what use is it only being able to fire directly in front of you, right? This is where our head-mounted display comes into play. Although its proper name is Helmet-Mounted Queuing System, we'll stick to HMD. With this, we can lock onto targets by looking at them, to a point of course. Once this mode is selected, a circle appears and I simply need to point my head at the target, and if I get a good tone and the dynamic launch zone shows a good solution, I'll fire. But Chris, what's a dynamic launch zone? Well, the DLZ is a simple indexer showing me when it's good to fire, as well as telling me when I'm out of range or too close. Let's have a closer look at the DLZ. If we look at it, we can see a small vertical chart. The caret on the left is where the current solution is at, so if we're above here, we're too far away. Similarly, if it's below here, we are too close. Simply, this means that as long as the left caret is between these lines, we are able to launch. These aren't absolutes though. Within some means of luck, you may still hit your target if they change direction, altitude or speed. Within engagement ranges, however, it's still not as simple as, yep, you're in range, fire at will. Just before you're in range to fire, you have the option to loft your missile. The easy way to explain this is that you physically pitch the aircraft up so that when you fire the missile, it gets a head start in gaining altitude, pushing its range even further. When the left caret meets the first right marker, it will tell you how far you need to pitch up to loft in degrees. This is called range aerodynamic, or RARO on the DLZ. However, it's based on the assumption it's hitting head-on and the target aircraft makes no maneuvers whatsoever. Next we have range optimal, or ROPT, which is a bit of a misnomer, but it is similar to that of RARO, where you loft your missile, but it now gives a little wriggle room if the target decides to move. After this we have range probability of intercept, or RPI, and the only thing you need to know about this is that it has a high probability of hitting your target. Then we have range turn and run, or RTR, which represents the range the target can try to immediately turn, run a maneuver, and still not outrun the missile. Lastly, we have range minimum, which is pretty self-explanatory. Further below this, your missile will likely shoot past and not be able to turn tight enough to hit the target. Now, even I know that's too much nonsense for Star Citizen. It's not friendly to people who aren't interested in hardcore sims. However, you would at least expect them to have a min-max marker so that you don't waste missiles. In Diaspora, there doesn't seem to be a min or max range. Either you're locked on or you're not. And once you fire missiles, they seem to track forever until they hit something or a countermeasure. In Elite, we have a timer that ticks down until it's ready to fire, with audible cues. But it's still a work in progress, and I haven't been able to actually try the game myself. Aside from missiles in a short range, you'll have your guns. Fixed weapons in today's fighter aircraft. Everyone's heard it.
Still close for missiles, Goose. I'm switching to guns.
So how's it done? Yep, you could spitball it and hope the dots connect, but that would be an incredible waste of valuable ammo. What we have is a targeting aid called the Enhanced Envelope Gunsight, or EEGS. We're presented with the gun bore as always, but in addition to this we have a funnel and point of impact dot which represents bullets at target range. It's hard to explain, so hopefully the video helps, but simply, you want to put the wings of your enemy aircraft between the lines of the funnel, and then have your impact dot on top of the aircraft. You also want to be turning in the same direction and bank as the enemy aircraft for a better probability of hitting your target. In Elite we have an almost similar system, but simplified for ease of use, usually pointing at a location to strike a hit, which does the job just fine. Obviously for laser weapons you won't have to lead due to it moving at near light speeds, but with everything else you have a lead indicator, and that's pretty much it. You point your guns to a location and fire. With the use of gimbaled weapons, or weapons that move around, the need to point directly at the target is further removed, putting some automation to the process. Something I hope they don't go too overboard with, and still give the element of player skill the best deciding factor. In Diaspora, it does depend on the difficulty setting, but we can assume for balance sakes things will be on the hardest, meaning that we have to shoot exactly over where it says to shoot. Similar goes for Elite. However, they've balanced this by making gimbaled weapons less powerful and those fixed to bore sight more powerful, which I think is a great gameplay mechanic. Now, for our next section we'll talk about situational awareness and the systems that help you with it. Before I go on, I'd like to quote the recent Arena Commander report. They state that, quote, "The signature system for detecting enemy ships based on their heat, radar cross-section and electromagnetic emissions has been overhauled to be more flexible and dynamic. This in turn has allowed us to update the behavior of both the player radar and update the way missiles behave based off which type of signature they are able to target." This could mean anything right now, but it tells me that they are considering radar, cross-sections and emissions, as well as different seeker heads for missiles. We've gone through beyond visual range engagements, short range engagements and guns, but what about situational awareness? Since we're on the topic of radars and emissions, it's worth having a look at how you can keep on top of things, knowing where friendly or enemy units are, or how about trying to use a bit of stealth? We've already talked about how the FCR will show contacts, both friendly or hostile. In my experience on BMS, it's used to find contacts out to about 80 miles, but what if you've lost your target at close range? What you do is lower the search range of your FCR to say about 10 miles or so, and head in the last known direction of the contact in hopes for a ping, or fly a search pattern. You'd have to be careful here of course. You might accidentally lock onto a friendly, so proper calls like ray gun are to be used again if you lock something up. Once you find your target, it's up to both of you where to go next. He might be trying to run, and you might want to chase. That's all good. Part of the battle is not letting the enemy in on what you're trying to do, and surprising him when possible. The problem with the fire control radar is that you're basically a loudspeaker for anyone willing to listen, and you will show up on their radar warning receiver. However, This still doesn't tell your target that you're actually focused on him or not, just that your radar is facing him. On that note, it's worth mentioning that these radars are forward facing only. So we can use our radar to find a target. If it's too far away to see, you can fly in the general direction until you can. You can also lock your target, of which there are two types. By default, the radar is sweeping left, right, up and down very quickly and sends relevant pings it deems an aircraft back to you. The first is a soft lock. This is where the radar reduces its scan range to get better accuracy on the target, as well as designating a target for your missiles to lock onto. The second is a hard lock, when the radar will focus all its power and attention to that single target, but this will alert the enemy that you've locked onto him. In either mode, your target will show up on your head-mounted display, so you can easily find them. So, your fire control radar sends signals, but how do you receive them? This is done by our Radar Warning Receiver, or RWR. As mentioned before, it will to the best of its capability identify types of aircraft from all incoming radar signals and disseminate them between threats that are too far away to engage us and close enough to engage us. It will also do the same for ground targets. However, as its name implies, it receives radar signals, and while AI might not be smart enough to turn it off, human players are. If you're chasing an enemy aircraft and he isn't aware of your presence other than you were around, the worst thing you can do is announce it by turning on your radar needlessly and giving yourself away. So if you wish, you can turn your radar off, which have valid tactics. Your target will in most cases have his on and will be trying to find you by flying around, or looking out of his cockpit. But flying behind and low puts you in their blind spot, a perfect time to sneak up and use guns. Similarly, if you've lost visual on an enemy and he's still got his radar on, you can use your RWR to get a general direction from you. This plays right into the next topic of stealth. Stealth today, in the most simplest terms because I simply don't know enough about it, can be done by reducing cross-sections of your aircraft by either having angles and surfaces that will deflect radar signals or radar-absorbent materials. You can also reduce cross-section by using stealth panels to store weapons instead of external hardpoints and surfaces. Anything to make the enemy radar less effective at finding you. I've seen it said by some that in space you can't hide from technology such as radar or mask heat.
The minute we move in there, they're gonna spot us on their radar.
Not if we jam it.
Aha! You're right!
But they've bound themselves to technology of today. It wouldn't be hard to imagine a sort of force field or shield that will completely deny any external source of radiation to reflect back in the same direction, or allow thermal sensors to even see it. The ability to match surrounding temperatures on your vehicle is also something that is being developed today, so it won't be hard to imagine that with the evolution of sensors, the same could be said for stealth or electronic defences. Speaking of electronic countermeasures or ECM, these can be defensive in nature to confuse receivers, to make your aircraft seem to disappear or to move about erratically to confuse them, or used offensively to jam radars in an attempt to completely saturate its receiver with noise. In space sims, you can have decoys that will emit their own signal to confuse sensors into thinking that it's you instead of your actual ship, while you turn off your sensors and engine and go dark until you've pushed some distance away or hidden behind an object like an asteroid. In Elite, you can flush heat into a heatsink and drop them as decoys as well,
Heatsink deployed.
which is another unique way of countermeasures in the future. This can also allow you to go dark, drift away using whatever inertia you have and hide from your pursuer. I'd love to talk about actual defensive maneuvers, but this is a complex topic for all sorts of engagements. It's also a bit hard for me to demonstrate without the ability to record external footage, and it would just go on a bit too long. So I'll leave you with a link to The Art of the Kill, which is a basic fighter maneuvering instructional video that shipped with Falcon 3.0. It's not for everyone, but if you want to know some cool tips for atmospheric maneuvers and have an hour to burn, check it out. So that's air-to-air engagements, but what about stationary targets like SAM sites, ground targets, or assume space stations, floating weapon systems, bases built into asteroids or carriers? Not much changes. You're always ready for that air-to-air engagement, and all that changes is the way you use your weapons. For bombs in Falcon BMS or DCS-A-10, it's virtually identical. You have two modes, CCIP or CCRP. CCIP being constantly computed impact point, which will tell you where your bomb will hit when you press the release key, great for diving on a target and releasing bombs. CCRP being constantly computed release point, this is when you can't keep eyes on the target and want to fly directly over it. You simply hold down the release button and fly a vector over the target. When it's good to drop, it will do so automatically, used for when you need to stay high up or level. Bombs come in different varieties. You have dumb bombs, which are simply aerodynamically stable and have no method of course correction. Then you have smart bombs, either laser guided, infrared or GPS, have the ability to change their path as they fall, needed for precision strikes. If you need to drop bombs low, but so low that they damage your aircraft, they can be fitted with drag devices such as a parachute to retard their descent, giving you time to bug out. In Star Citizen, or other space sims, I can expect them having missiles with bigger warheads instead of bombs. You lock, you release, and it will track to the target and eventually, hopefully, hits. But mass means just as much in space as it does on Earth. The mass saved in using a weapon without a motor, without fuel, can be better used towards a larger payload, or cheaper systems. After all, I assume we'll have to pay for our weapons in the persistent universe, right? So, I do expect to see dumb munitions in space sims, mainly for slow-moving or stationary targets. Maybe with the technology to piece shields, or better penetration for hitting larger ships with thick hulls.
I still don't understand why these torpedoes are ripping right through our shields.
This could introduce a whole new level of gameplay. You don't lead your target, you don't lock your target, but you line up and attack like a dive bomber and break off. It would be really fun to give bomber roles to pilots in Star Citizen. Roles such as taking out larger turrets or close defense turrets and carriers, allowing other ships to enter the area. While weapon engagements sound easy enough alone and you don't have to worry about it, when you're with others you want to make every shot count. In some cases you'll have a small payload, so you don't want to accidentally fire at the same target. In BMS or DCS you can either assign a leader to hand off targets, or simply by using your initiative. This is possible by either announcing your targets or via your data link. Data links between aircraft is such an important piece of technology. You can use it to identify your flight and where they are, what they've locked onto, or receive targets from them. So you've completed your mission and it's time to go home. For some, the fun is in the action, I can understand that, but a persistent world waits for nobody, and you still have to get to the fight and make it back home. The game's not over yet, so what else could there be? Usually, when you attack something, the enemy won't just sit around, and they might send interceptors to try catch you before you make it home. They might seem like juicy targets, but you've made it so far in one piece, so why try your luck? Depending on the situation, you might need to come straight back in to rearm and refuel, or to repair your ship, so coming home in a timely manner is wise. So we'll move on to landing. This is part of the fun for me, more so in bad weather or with damaged systems. The harder it is, the more reward I get out of it. Bring you a bird to the ground after all you've been through, adding another notch to your cap, which is valuable experience. However, landing in space really wouldn't be that hard. You could come in at a complete crawl, but that's not fun, and during combat, you're an easy target. During battle, if you're coming in for landing, you don't want to hold everybody else up. In the first ever video of Star Citizen, we see Chris Roberts take off from inside the Bengal carrier. Now, I'd like to see this reversed. We already know the carrier has a front and rear bay door, but what I'd like to see is the ability to come in hot. Just like carrier landings of today, it's an incredible thing to see or experience, let alone doing it yourself. So, instead of physically touching down, you could replace the arrestor hook and wire with a magnetic field. What it would do, it would slow down ships safely, allowing them to come in fast so they don't get shot down on approach. And simply, why not? It would be really fun. The same goes for takeoff via launch assist systems like the catapult, or in Diaspora, launch tubes, sitting there while the battle outside rages and being moments away from all of that, waiting for that red light to turn green and you go from 0 to insanity in mere seconds. Again, I know, the fun isn't just the flying and the fighting, it's being able to land something that's considered tough, or refueling in mid-air with precision. Chris Roberts has already kinned joining Squadron 42 to that of the Navy, so I believe that having mechanics in a game that takes practice and perfection to master can add longevity to a game. It's time to wrap this up. I understand that I've condensed subjects into 2 half-hour videos, and even then, a lot of it is just way too hardcore for a game like Star Citizen. But through all of this, I hope that I've helped you understand some things, maybe interested you in trying out some other games, or taught you some new things to try out yourself. The bigger hope of mine is that when the dogfighting module for Star Citizen does come out, we can compare the changes that we don't know about, see how useful the information given to us is, and maybe talk about how some things could be changed if needed. Remember, we have a voice. I know some of us are more vocal than others, and that we at times ask for the world, but devs today are much more accepting to ideas and changes than of the past. We have amazing access to the creation of the game, rarely seen before, and in such quantity. And with competitions like the Next Great Starship, they already have looked out toward the community for ideas. So, if you like this video and think I'm going in the right direction, let me know. Similarly, if you dislike it, let me know why, and in the future I'll try to change it for the better. To conclude things, the aim of this is as a stepping stone of which I can make more videos once Arena Commander is released, so we can talk more about what we actually have, or do not have. Then we can discuss real points that have entirely made up from assumptions, or early build footage. But first and foremost, I understand that Star Citizen has a wider audience to appeal to, so I'm not asking for a study sim with a 600-page manual or anything like that. So until next time, remember, have fun out there, guys. Kick the tires and light the fires. Pew 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 pew.